Tim, I was horrified to discover the other day that the world's biggest selling artist is someone I've never heard of. Why have I never heard of Yayoi Kusama?
Well, you shouldn't be ashamed about that, Claire, because in fact it's been part of her struggle as an artist for 8 decades now to gain that kind of global recognition. Last year she gained that recognition. She became the highest selling artist in the world to basically fulfill, if not a prophecy, then a promise she made to herself when she moved from Japan to the US in 1956.
And she's 95 years old.
She's 95, and one of the more interesting things about her, of course, is that she checked into a psychiatric unit in Tokyo in 1973, and she has lived there ever since.
She's a very distinctive looking woman. She's got a bright red wig in a lot of the photographs that I've seen of her. I can see why she's huge with the Instagram generation. Often artists who are extremely popular and whose art is easy to look at and easy to enjoy are treated with snobbery by the curators and critics of the world. Why is that not the case for her?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily the case. I mean, I look forward to seeing what our art reviewer Christopher Allen says once this exhibition's open next month, so I wouldn't want to speak for him. And certainly there are elements of the art world that don't treat her work with such deference. But I think the really important thing about Kusama's work is that it clearly comes from a very troubled place, and yet the works that appear are these kind of things of pure joy and beauty and singularity and creativity. Kusama, at the age of about 8, began having these hallucinations, these polka dots. She had a difficult childhood. Her mother certainly did not encourage her art, in fact would tear it up in front of her. Her father was basically an absent dad. Her mother would send her on kind of espionage attempts to watch his many extramarital activities with other women, and she has spoken quite publicly about the sort of lifelong effect and fear of sex, in fact, that has engendered in her, which is quite sad, and in fact it's really inhibited her relationship with her family and intimate relationships.
How's she regarded now in Japan?
Now is a very different story than to that which she was treated when she was returned to Japan in the 1970s. She was treated as a bit of a scandal queen there because she'd been part of that pop movement. She staged naked protests. Didn't kind of translate well in Japan, which of course was still emerging from the long shadow of World War II and remains a pretty conservative country. She is this living antiquity, this curio in this psychiatric hospital in Japan. She's seldom seen in public, but there is a lot of affection and affinity for her in that country.
One of the reasons we're talking about her today is that the National Gallery of Victoria, the NGV, has just purchased 2 big works. What are they and why?
So the first one is called Dancing Pumpkin. It's this 9-metre high, 11-legged, kind of octopedon, 11-ton dancing pumpkin. It is what it says on the tin. It doesn't move. It is yellow and black and this most beautiful kind of fluid-looking sculpture. The more important purchase, I suppose, in terms of Kusama's oeuvre is Narcissus Garden. Now that was a work that she exhibited in 1966 at the Venice Biennale. She placed it in front of the Italian pavilion as with a sign that said, "Your Narcissism for sale." She sold them for what now would be about $2 US individually, these balls, until she was kind of taken away by authorities. And it was a really important time for her as an artist because she was both, she was desperate to conquer the art world, but she was also disillusioned with her place in it at that time. She didn't get the kind of recognition she had hoped to receive in the US, being exhibited alongside people like Andy Warhol and Donald Judd and Jackson Pollock.
How does it feel for you as someone who loves art and is very interested in her story personally? Is it slightly troubling, or is it, for you, is it an inspiring story of what art can do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's a great story of endurance and never giving up. I mean, as I mentioned before, she had this promise to herself that she would one day kick everyone's ass and rise to the top of the art market and beat everything, beat all the fact that she was an ethnic in America, the fact that she was a woman at a particularly kind of febrile, male-dominated time in the US. And she never really gave up that hope. Now, whether that has to do with her obsessive nature, and it probably does, is something that I can't answer, but I do think it's a great story of endurance. And yet she's a very lonely person. She's disassociated from her family. She's sometimes disassociated from herself. And so I think it's that another kind of paradox in her psyche that I think is really interesting to explore, because she's unlike any artist in that sense. She is a singularity like the dots she paints.
Well, I feel a lot cooler than I did before we started this interview, Tim, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.